My name is Marcy Wilburn, and I'm the project coordinator for the Indiana IEP Resource Center. I am here with a couple of colleagues today, and our goal for today is really to help you all understand as district leaders what you can do to improve outcomes for students with disabilities. So we try a lot of things, we spin our wheels over and over, but what are the things that can be effective for students with disabilities? Angie, I'll go ahead and let you introduce yourself first.
Good morning. My name is Angie McKinney, and I'm one of the consultants with the Indiana IEP Resource Center. My background is as a school psychologist first, and then also as a special ed administrator, as an assistant director for a co-op for a number of years too, before moving into this kind of a position. So just a little about me, I never was a dog person until I got married, and then I became a dog person, and now I am totally a dog person, and my life is not complete without 1 to 4 dogs, depending on any given year. I'm a graduate of IU and then Indiana State University, and teach in their graduate program for school psychology now as kind of a side gig too. And I am the food monitor, so when it is time for lunch, we will be breaking for lunch regardless of where we are in the process for the day, because we need to have lunch. So I'm going to hand it over then to John.
Yeah, thanks. I love the photo she used. You know how when people are 90 and you see their obituary picture? That's going to be mine when I'm 85. John Purcell. I was an elementary teacher and principal, and principal for actually 25 years, 3 years in central office with curriculum and curriculum grants and transportation, which actually was pretty fun. Live in near Fort Wayne, just south of Fort Wayne, close to Bluffton. Grew back there, and I was fortunate to work with Bluffton closely. And wife and 2 kids. We've been married 37 years. She's put up with me and our 2 grown children. And really happy to be here as a consultant with IEPRC my first year.
Thanks, John. All right, this is John's slide because his lack of presence on social media, I couldn't pull pictures to create his slide. However, this is his LinkedIn picture, so he does have a little bit of presence on social media. My name is Marcy Wilburn, and as I said earlier, I'm the project coordinator for the center. I've been doing this grant work for 10 years, so I started out for the Promoting Achievement for Students with Sensory Loss project, and then moved to the Indiana IEP Resource Center after that. Prior to this, I did teach in Brownsburg for 6 years and Vigo County for a year. So teaching background, mild interventions. I taught a self-contained functional skills program for a year, and both mild interventions at the elementary and high school level when I was teaching. I have 2 crazy twin boys, and this is about the best picture you can get with 6-year-old twin boys. I love all things chocolate and Diet Coke and beaches, so that's where you'll find me when I have some free time. I'm currently working on my doctorate in curriculum instruction from Indiana State University, so once that dissertation's done, I will be complete with that. My master's is in applied behavior analysis from Ball State, and my undergraduate, of course, is in special education and elementary education from Indiana State University. So a little bit about me and why I'm with you today. But now I want to know a little bit about who's here with us. So we will be using Menti a lot throughout the session. It's all on one Menti program. So if you scan this QR code or type in this URL, we'll be utilizing this throughout the morning session. And when you get there, go ahead and answer the first question, which is who's here today? Let us know. Okay, so show of hands for my district admin people. Okay, building level admin people. Who are my teacher leaders here? Wonderful. Teacher leaders, are you special ed leaders or are you general ed teachers? Special ed? Remediation, okay, wonderful. The The reason we ask this question is I think it's really important to tailor the training to meet our audience needs. So if at any time you have a question or something comes up that maybe isn't in the slide deck or maybe a little off topic of what we're talking about, please feel free to pose that question. We have a lot of expertise in this room. We have expertise who are presenting, and together we can come up with some answers. So the intent of this is for you to leave here feeling like you got something out of it. So please make this training what you need it to be and let us know how we can best meet your needs. Okay, the next slide is all about the stuff that we want to provide. Normally you have folders. This time we didn't provide folders. What we're doing now is we have a Padlet link. How many of you are familiar with Padlet? Okay, the best thing about Padlet is that we can continually add resources. So remember when I talked earlier about tailoring this training to meet your needs? If something comes up and we're like, oh, we have a resource that can support that, I can add it to Padlet and the link doesn't change, and we're still able to provide you with the information that you need. So on the Padlet, you have both presentation slides and additional resources that we'll be talking about today. I'm actually going to hop over to Padlet really quickly and just go through everything from beginning to end so I don't have to stand behind this podium and tell you the information throughout the session. We can just do it all at once. So as you're looking at the Padlet site, like I said, you have the presentation slides. You have several resources about inclusion. So a few of the book resources that I think will be beneficial to you. In addition to the Padlet, all of you should have Leading for All on your table. Leading for All, we have one copy per leadership team that's here today. So for each of the table tents that are on your table, we provided a copy. So make sure you take that with you today for your team. But some of what we're going to talk about are pulled from these resources, so we wanted you to be able to have these references as well. The next thing that we're going to go into in the morning session is really dive deep into high leverage practices. So there's some resources around high leverage practices in here as well. In the afternoon session, we'll be talking a lot about problem solving and bringing up some specific tools for problem solving at the district level and school level. So those are available to you as well. And the last column is just some of our trainings and workshops that you can access online. We also have the flyers out on the table. So not necessarily specific to this training, but information that you may want to look at that you would have available to you. Anybody unable to get on the Padlet? Just need the link again? Okay, let me pull up that slide for you. Anybody need more time? Eric, you all set over there? Okay, thank you. All right, so here's what we want you all to get out of today. We want you to identify the benefits of inclusive education and where to find the research base around inclusive education. Determine both your individual beliefs around what students are capable of and really reflecting upon what are your district's beliefs. And there are going to be pockets of different beliefs across your district. Help you identify what are effective practices and what are effective programming types for students with disabilities. And really looking at a structured process to problem solve. How do we look at our data? How do we determine that what we're doing is effective? Or are we on the right track, or do we need to change gears? So that'll be more of the afternoon. And then just some tools to help you guide that systems change work. So started off with some introductions. I'm going to hop into improving outcomes, the what and the how of the work. Then we will have lunch from 11:15 to 12:15. And like Angie said, she will stop me because I'm a go, 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 and I'll just keep going. But she'll tell me she's hungry, and we will promise you will have an hour long for lunch. Then in the afternoon, we're going to dive into the Student Success Gap tool and talk through how you can determine what are the gaps within your system and how to problem solve towards determining what practices we need to start implementing, and then what are those action plans and implementation for our district. So there's going to be lots of time throughout the morning where you're talking together with your team. We recognize that you are busy, 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 and don't have a lot of team time within your district. So a lot of stop, talk amongst your team, reflect on what's currently happening and how you can improve those practices for later. So let's kick it off with what we know. What we know is that nationally, English language learners and students with disabilities are the two lowest performing student groups. Now, English language learners and students with disabilities flip-flop. So like, depending on what assessment you look at, depending on what year you're looking at, they kind of go back and forth. The difference between this data that I pulled from NAEP actually was like 0.5% difference between English language learners and students with disabilities. But regardless, when you're looking at almost any data set, whether that's national or local, you're going to find that these are the two lowest performing student groups. Probably no surprise to anyone within this room. So this is something we know and that we've grappled with for years. It's not new. It's not because of the pandemic. These are the two student groups that are traditionally the lowest performing. But what we also know, that when students are included, outcomes improve. But I want you to think, do our systems reflect this? And when I say students are included, I don't just mean our high incidence disabilities, learning disabilities, other health impairments. I'm talking about all kids are successful when they are included. And this is 2017 data, so it's actually 35 years of data says that students are more successful if they are included in general education, if they have access to that general education content. So we know they're the lowest performing, but we also know they're more successful when they're included in general ed. So here's Indiana's reality. When you're looking at least restrictive environment data, this is for LRE code 50, which is students being in the general education setting 80% or more of their day. So as I'm looking here, and this is just Indiana statewide data, we have the target line of where we want districts to be is blue. We have the data, or what Indiana is doing, which is orange. So in 2013, state target data was that 67%. And districts were meeting that with ease. They had over 70% of their students, and I'm talking Indiana-wide, 70% of their students included in an LRE code 50. And if you look here, we have made gains ever since 2013. Beautiful graph, right? Like, it's exactly where we want to be. We want more students included in general education, and that's what's taking place. So this is our strength. We have students in classrooms. We have students being served in an LRE code 50, which is that general education environment. But what we don't have are necessarily the outcomes to go along with that. So that's all what today's training is about. How do we focus on improving those outcomes? So first, I want you to go ahead and scan this code. If you're already in Menti, then you can just go to the next slide and type in what phrases you would use to describe inclusion, inclusive practices. What does it look like within your system? Or what would you prefer it to look like within your system? Nice. Collaborative planning, cooperative. Curiosity. I like that one. I've not seen that before. Removing the barriers. It's welcoming. Providing learning opportunities. Lots of equal and equity, and we'll talk about the difference between those two things. Intentional learning. Valued. So we know a lot about what an inclusive setting should feel like and should look like and should be. Think about your system. Are these things taking place within your system? Does anybody want to take a stab at the difference between equality and equity?
So equity is what you need to be successful.
Equity is what you need to be successful?
Equality is splitting it into separate so that each person gets the same.
Correct. So equality is everybody getting the same. Equity is getting what they need when they need it. In inclusive education, which one are we striving for? Equity, right? We can't strive for equality because the same, educators know better than anybody, the same does not work for everyone. We have to give people what they need when they need it. So this is a little bit of a quiz time. I would like for you to go ahead and determine which one of these words goes with which picture. And when you're doing that, I would also like for you to order A, B, C, and D from how we started and where we are now. So which word goes with which picture, and then order them. All right, so let's check our answers. Okay, so we started out historically where students with disabilities were completely excluded from education. Then we moved into more of this segregated setting where we had institutions, where students were educated within institutions. Then special education law said, well, wait, students deserve a free, appropriate public education. So we integrated students in. Okay, so now we have special education students coming into the building, but they have their own class, they have their own section, oftentimes they have their own start time and release time even. It looks a little bit different. But now we're saying, and Indiana's data says, that we're doing a better job including students within the general education environment. And that's where we get to this slide here. So we have students who are now being educated alongside their peers. Now, how many of you are familiar with Shelley Moore and her work? Okay, wonderful. If you're not, write her name down because you will learn to love her. But she has 5 more minutes, which are like short little podcasts, and the Moore is her last name, so it's M-O-O-R-E. And she really pushes our beliefs around inclusion. So she does these talks all around the country, and people have pushed back on this last circle of inclusion. Any guesses of why people are pushing back? The colored dots, tell me more. Yeah, so the colored dots, they're different colors. Somebody's viewing me as different here, right? Like if I have a learning disability, I'm red. If I have autism, I'm blue. Okay, that wasn't her intent, but that was the pushback, right? And if I'm a general education student, I'm green. I'm always good. Well, you guys know as well as I do, general education students aren't always good. They need supports in place too. So as I'm looking here, this was the second iteration, right? All kids are different. All kids have strengths. All kids have opportunities for growth. We are not just teaching the green dots and the color dots. All of our kids are bringing something to the table. And we're responsible for educating all of them. And then somebody said, but wait, that's not enough. Somebody pushed back yet again. Anybody have any idea of what the next pushback was on this visual? Huh? Well, we're not all circles yet. Okay, so that one has not been said yet, but definitely I will be emailing her after this to tell her. Sometimes she had like small dots and big dots. That was one thing, but she didn't do different shapes yet. We are more than just a single color, right? So this was the next iteration. Our identity is different depending on what we're talking about. So this sliver of me might be my culture. This sliver of me might be my educational knowledge base and skills. This sliver of me might be my athletic ability. So we are individuals. We are all different. Day to day looks different. Situation from situation looks different on how we may act very different in front of our friends than we act in front of our colleagues. We may act very different at home than we do at school. Those are the things that are represented here. We all have different pieces that make up who we are. And how do we get to know the pieces of our students so that we can best serve them in the environment that we're trying to serve them in? So shapes would be another iteration. I like it. So here's the opportunity for you all. Again, high levels of inclusion across the state. But here is the iLearn proficiency rate from 2021 to 2022 for students with disabilities. 8.9%. Pretty dismal, right? So you're doing great including kids, but we're not doing great at providing the services within the classroom. But what I will say, and I know you all are aware as well, all students didn't do that great, right? But there still is a significant gap from where students with disabilities are and where their peers are from. Now, when I say all students didn't do that well, I think it's important to note that we can't provide special education services and we can't provide intervention to general education students or special education students if our tier 1 is not in a good place. So when we talk about the almost 35% passing rate for all kids across the state, we need to also look at our tier 1. And in your district, if you have 80% or more kids who are successful at tier 1, kudos to you. Start focusing on those special education services and those interventions. But we need to have our tier 1 in a healthy spot before we can spend our time and efforts investing in special education interventions. So think about that first. You can't intervene your way out of poor tier 1 instruction. You have to have good tier 1. So that's the first place to look when we're talking about data this afternoon. Let's start with that tier 1 data, not just our special education data. Okay, so this is our opportunity. This is why we're here today. At your table, I would like for you to discuss these first 2 questions. Talk about what's currently taking place in your district. What placement options are available? And yes, we have to offer the continuum, but maybe even considering what's your LRE Code 50 look like? What does it look like? What percentage of your students are included in general ed? Then I want you to really look at our outcomes where we want them to be. What can we do to elicit some positive outcomes? So take some time now to talk amongst your table. Okay, lots of good conversation. I promise you will have time to come back to these conversations as we discuss throughout the morning and afternoon. But right now, I want you to take some time to fill out this Menti, and I want you to do it on your personal beliefs. So I'm going to give you 4 belief statements, and I want you to honestly, it's anonymous, I'm not going to know who's doing it. I want you to honestly rate yourself on what your beliefs are in these 4 categories. It's a Likert scale. Remember, when you see the word all learners or every student, I'm talking about all. I'm not talking about just high incidence disabilities. I'm talking about students with all disabilities. Every child learns and achieves to high standards. I appreciate doing it this way Because if I were to pose the question openly to all of you and say, do you believe that every child can learn and achieve to high standards? Almost all of us would feel obligated to kind of put our hand in the air. But we have some variants of our own beliefs when we're talking about every, especially when I say every means all students. So if those in this room who are leading the charge don't fully have this belief in place, or this foundational belief to what we're putting forth within our system, this is the place to start the work. We have to think about the beliefs within our system. Because if you're at a 3.8 as district level leaders who signed up to come to a training about improving outcomes for students with disabilities, let's face it, you have people who are like -7 on this chart within your district. We have to have a belief that we can do it. Learning includes both academic and social competencies. Almost all of us are there, which is wonderful. Because we're not only teaching reading and writing and math. We're teaching how to act, how to respect one another, how to behave. And that's for all of our students, but specifically for some of our students with disabilities who need extra support in that area. Because academically, they would be just fine. It's the behaviors that are getting in the way of their academics so that they're not successful. So we have to be able to teach both. Every member of the education community continues to grow, learn, and reflect. What do we mean by every member? We mean the people here, the district leadership teams, the building leadership teams. We of course mean our teachers, but more importantly, we mean our instructional assistants, our paraprofessionals. We mean our bus drivers. They are the first ones to see students at the beginning of the day. They are the last ones to see them at the end of the day. And they might note changes in students that we may not see throughout the day. So think about every member of our community has to embrace this mindset of beliefs in inclusive culture in order to get there. And then the last one, every member of the community is responsible for every child. We've got to get rid of this mentality of, those are your students, they're special education students. These are my students, they're general education students. Every student should be on a general education class list. It should be in our students. When you are a 5th grade teacher and that kindergartner walks in the room and you tell them hello and you know their name, guess what? One day that kindergartner is going to be a 5th grade student. Why not start that relationship 5 years prior to be able to build on working with that child? They're not just yours and mine. They are everybody's. Administrative assistants in the front office who say hello and greet students each morning might be that person's champion for their education. It only takes one person. So don't limit the who in your district. All people should be supporting all students. And we need to convey that as a leadership team that, look, we can't rise above that 8.9% unless we're all in this together. And I mean all of us. And these are all our students. The foundational beliefs are so important to lay that structure down. And I'm not saying that everybody needs to be at a 5. But what I am saying is we talk about these foundational beliefs. We push ourselves to grow in these areas. And when we do that and we start to see success, we will only continue to grow in our beliefs. Because if the data is telling us it's working and students are achieving to high levels, that's enough to change our mindset and our thoughts. But if we never talk about it and we sweep it under the rug and we don't talk about what are these foundational beliefs of inclusion, then I can guarantee you're never going to move past that 3.8. And for those teachers who are at a -7, you're never going to move past that -7. So we have to start somewhere, so those beliefs. What I want you to do now is at your table, let's just talk a little bit about current practices for evaluation within your district and IEP development. And I promise I'll tie it together. Okay, So you've had a little bit of time to discuss current practice on IEP development within your system. Here is what we typically see. Students not successful in general education. Now there probably needs to be an inserted bullet around providing intervention, data collection, that RTI MTSS model. But if they're still not successful, eventually we lead to an evaluation. We evaluate a student. We know these are the areas of strength. These are the deficit areas. Eventually we write goals for this student, assuming they qualify and they're eligible. We determine what services and supports are needed. We put those in place. We monitor their progress. If successful, oftentimes our supports decrease. Sometimes I would argue that even if successful, our supports stay exactly the same. And then, if unsuccessful, supports become more restrictive. Anybody say, no, that's not what it looks like in my district? Yeah?
I would say we have some level of RTI or MTSS within each of our buildings.
Correct. So yeah, that's the data point that extra dot we'll add in there. So there's some intervention prior to the evaluation. Absolutely. Any other differences? Yeah?
I would say the normal practices for data collection across buildings should be something that is part of a discussion, so that when people are identifying, there's a protocol to the procedure, like steps to follow that make the process so you can verify
Yeah.
and quantify.
So what are those procedures that are in place to determine if students are eligible or not? And how are we talking about the data of students consistently so that there is some criteria set for who qualifies and who doesn't? Absolutely. So the reason we bring this up is we have this legal document, this IEP, that is really looking at how can we help best support students to improve these deficit areas. But the argument is that we're highlighting the things that are wrong with students. And this is the medical model of disability. This is what we have always done historically. This is what's not working for you. Here's your Band-Aid, we're gonna fix it. If it doesn't work, we're gonna give you a cast. If the cast doesn't work, then we're gonna give you something even more intensified, maybe even surgery. If the cough drop and the Kleenexes don't work for the cold, maybe we need to go to the doctor and get something more intense. So this is really a medical model. And this is current practice across the state and nationally. It's not something that we're doing wrong. It's just the way we've always done it before. But I'm asking you to shift your mindset a little bit, and we're going to go through some activities in order to do that. Because when you talk to people with disabilities, here's what they're saying. I'm not broken. I don't need to be fixed. So how does that change our way of thinking? Okay, so I'm going to show you this video today. And when you first watch this video, you're going to think this woman is crazy. Why is she showing us this? But in the end, I hope we can tie it together and relate it to our students with disabilities and helping them find their purpose and noting the strengths that all individuals have.
I think I was always misunderstood. People just didn't seem to like me. I think I annoyed them. I got on their nerves. I don't know why. That's just the way it was. strong. I don't know. I really can't say. Yeah, it was lonely, really lonely. But you get used to it after a while. And then one day, everything changed. Somebody finally accepted me for what I am. Since I've got this job, life is completely different. I finally feel useful, good at something.
Okay, did you get it? What was he the whole time? The wind. Okay, I was in a session with Shelly Moore and she showed this video and I thought, what is she thinking? But interestingly enough, how she found it was somebody actually had emailed it to her and said, are they making fun of students with disabilities within this video? And she's like, no, not at all. I mean, it's a wind video. It's a wind energy video. It has nothing to do with individuals with disabilities. But she saw it as the complete opposite. We have those students where all we can see is them ruffling our hair or taking the water bottles and flinging them across the room, right? And we can't see past that. But just like the wind, it can drive us crazy sometime, but there's also so much potential when used appropriately and showing the purpose of the wind. Or what is the purpose so that this student can be successful? How can I rethink how I'm looking at this student? So that I can stop thinking about all the things that are driving me crazy about this kid and start thinking about what is this student's potential. And that is a mindset shift, because a medical model of disability tells us to look at what's wrong and fix it. This is different. This is different for me. This is different for all of you, and it's most certainly different for the educators within your building. So we need to think about shifting the way we look at disability. We need to look at presuming competence. Who am I to say, you can't do that? Andrea, I'm sorry, but this is going to be where you're going to max out, and I'm going to stick you in this room with these kids all day long because I know that you can't do more than that. That's not my job. We don't know. My job is to think you can do it, and then either prove it to me or prove me wrong. But I'm going to think you can do it. So we need to presume that competence. We need to understand that environments that we're putting kids in create barriers. If you have rows of desks and you're expected to sit there for 50 minutes at a time, that creates a barrier. Not just for our students who are 10, but for me as an individual. I can't sit still for 50 minutes. So that is a barrier within the environment, and if I'm getting up and moving when I'm not supposed to be, it's probably less on me and more on the environment that I've put in. So again, it's a mindset shift. We have to change that. And when our context or our environments are less limiting, then our students can be in less restrictive placements. Legally, you have to offer a continuum of services. You have to have that level available where some students are going to need more of a self-contained setting and some students are going to be in general education. But what I'm trying to tell you today is if we have environments where students can be successful, then we can move kids to a less restrictive environment and they can still be successful. But there are things that we have to do systematically in order for this to work. We can't just go back to our districts tomorrow and say, okay, all kids in gen ed, because that's what that person said the other day. No, that's not what I'm saying. We have to prepare our systems, we have to prepare our people, and we have to get it ready. But once our environment is ready, then students can be successful in a least restrictive environment. So we may not need that more restrictive setting of a self-contained environment when our environment is ready. And environment doesn't mean just the place, it means the knowledge and skills of our teachers as well. So we're going to do a case study to kind of rethink how we've always done special education. So the next 2 slides are all about Tyson. I'll give you some time to read this one, then we'll move to the next one, and then you'll have some time to discuss as a table. Tyson's heading into kindergarten, hasn't had a lot of early intervention, and he is headed into kindergarten with some strong reading skills. Next slide. So, kindergarten is not the best situation for Tyson. We have some things going on with behavior. He's even been assigned an additional person to support his behaviors. But when they continue to escalate, the school district says, I think we're going to have to evaluate Tyson. Discussion questions. At your table, discuss his strengths and needs. Do you agree with the school? And any other thoughts you might have in regard to Tyson. All right, so what are some of Tyson's strengths? He can read. Coming in as a kindergartner, as a reader. He's inquisitive. Wonderful. He's confident. I think somebody's getting where I'm going with this. All right, what are some of Tyson's needs?
He needs to learn socialization skills.
I heard it in the back and I'm hearing it here. I don't agree with the school because he needs to be taught how to do these things. First of all, he's in kindergarten. He's never done school before. You can't make decisions on kindergartners in September. We got to start from somewhere and give them some skills. Any other thoughts on Tyson? Yeah?
I would look at Tier 1 instruction and see what it looks like. If they are providing students with a model for behavior, if they are providing students with breaks and what transitions look like, and if they are doing like stations where activities can be kind of like small group activities to transition into an area where Tyson can learn how to behave appropriately in a classroom situation.
Nice. So
Any of that, we don't have a right to do any of that.
I love it, Eric. So he said, let's look at Tier 1, because one of our foundational beliefs was we have both academic and social competencies. I think I heard Amy maybe say that if this was just a reading problem and not a behavior problem, my guess is the first month and a half of kindergarten, we probably wouldn't be pulling him in for an evaluation. But because it's a behavioral problem, he definitely has something going on and something's wrong with him. And we're going to fix it, because that's what we do. So we're going to think differently about Tyson. So these are some of the things that were in the write-up. He can't sit still. But instead, we can say that he's a type of learner that's successful when presented with movement task. Right? He's that kinesthetic learner. He calls out, but he's eager to share his thoughts. He runs around the room, but he's physically active. In a different context, these would be considered strengths. He has attention issues, but he does best when he's actively engaged. So again, think of the classroom context. Take away some of the barriers. What are some things that we can do within the environment to take Tyson from his deficits to his strengths and make sure that our environment is working for Tyson? So the problem's not within Tyson. but the context. We are going to diagnose the problems with the instruction, with the curriculum, and the environment before we ever talk about what to do with the learner. And once that's in place, we can support Tyson and probably, I would argue, other kids within that classroom as well. Again, it's kindergarten. We're all learning. And I heard somebody in the back say, that's why I couldn't be a kindergarten teacher. And I agree. God bless them. So we're going to talk a little bit about the ISIL riot matrix. And I just think this does a good job. And this is in your Padlet as a resource for you as well. But the ISIL part are the key domains of learning. And we look at the instruction, we look at the curriculum, we look at the environment first before we ever tap into that learner. And that's what we're going to start to do to re-story our students. So let's do that as a group. What could we do with the instruction, the curriculum, or the environment to support Tyson's need for movement? It's kindergarten. There are so many opportunities for this. What'd you say? Song activities. Absolutely. Hegarty. Minds in motion. Okay, what about eager to share his thoughts? What could we do differently in this case?
Active student responding, where everybody's answering.
Yes, active student responding where everybody's answering. And if we have more opportunities to respond, that's also going to increase our outcomes. So again, we're helping Tyson by designing our lessons this way, but we're really improving outcomes for all. Physically active, we could kind of go back up to the beginning, right? And then actively engaged. Any others for that? Active student response. In kindergarten, we know for direct instruction, 5 to 8 minutes. And I would argue less than that, especially at the beginning of the year. 5 to 8 minutes, they've checked out. For adult learners, 15 to 18 minutes. It's not much better. That's why we're doing all these table talks. That's why I'm showing videos. That's why I'm not just standing up here preaching to you. Because even your adult brain, your attention span would fade in and out if that's what we did. So 5 to 8 minutes of direct instruction is all that a kindergartner can handle. And again, I think that's a little long. So what are those active strategies that are put in place for students to be successful? So I want you to do a little bit of a self-reflection. You can talk amongst your table. Where are you personally in terms of restoring students? Where is your school or district? And what would have to take place in your current system to be able to initiate this change in thinking? Take some time to chat. Lots of good conversation. I did hear that Tyson's probably not the only kid like this, which is absolutely true. So definitely have to rethink this for all of our students. This Menti is all about self-efficacy. So when I'm asking the first question, again on a 5-point Likert scale, so you personally have the knowledge and skills to positively impact all students. We have district level leadership, some with expertise in special education, and our rating is a 3.8. Then asked to rate your educators within your building. Do they have the knowledge and skills to support all learners? 3.4, which is expected, right? Our administrators are the leaders within the building, but we need to help our teachers improve that level of efficacy as well. And the last one, I promote, or my teachers promote, a sense of self-efficacy within all of the students that we serve. So efficacy, that belief that we can do it. Do our leadership teams have it? Do our teachers have it? And do our students believe that they can do it? Because all three are probably more important than you realize. So when we're looking at efficacy, how many of you are familiar with Hattie's work? I hear some giggles. Must be a focus in some of your districts. But as we're looking here, visible learning, what works and what doesn't work. So you know, most of you had your hand raised. John Hattie takes meta-analyses and determines what instructional practices are effective and what instructional practices are ineffective. We have some things that we know, if we do them, research tells us we have a negative effect on students. Example, retention, right? We don't often hold back students anymore. Now, sometimes there's a circumstance where it may make sense, but for the most part, research tells us don't do it. It doesn't work. They still continue to fall behind even when we retain students. Then there's other practices that, guess what? Don't pat yourself on the backs because kids are going to get it anyway. Developmentally, they're going to get these skills regardless of the practices that you put in place. Then there are typical teacher effects. So we put these practices in place and kids do well. They improve. They have growth. But in order to get the most bang for our buck, we want to be at that hinge point, 0.4 or above. So when we're talking about all of the practices that Hattie reviews, we want to utilize the ones most frequently and consistently that are above that 0.4 mark. That's what's going to give us the biggest impact for our students. Do you know what the new number one is? Collective teacher efficacy. 0.4 or better is the good stuff. Collective teacher efficacy has the zone of desired effect at 0.57. 1.57, sorry. So when we're talking about collective teacher efficacy, we already talked about the importance of a shared responsibility. It's not your students or my students. It is everyone's students. And it's not just the belief that I think that students in the general education environment can be successful. I have to have the belief that all kids can be successful. And it's not just the belief, it's the knowledge and skills that comes along with it. So we have to build our teachers up so that, one, they feel like they can be successful and they can work together with their colleagues to be successful. Those general education and special education relationships are so important. It's not the, oh, you take your kids in the back of the room to do this assignment. We work together to help all of our students to be successful. That's the mentality we're going for. This is a brief video where John Hattie really explains not only the importance of collective teacher efficacy, but also that it's more than just belief. So as you're watching it, what I want you to do is I want you to think about what are the things that make it collective teacher efficacy, and what do we need to do as a system to help improve this for our teachers?
The new number one in visible learning is teachers' collective efficacy. And on the one hand, that's exciting because it confirms the story. On the other hand, it's a bit of an unfortunate title. It kind of implies that having efficacy, having confidence, having all the teachers in the school believing they can make a difference, it's actually more than that. Now, to have a meta-analysis, you have to have lots of studies. This is not a new idea. This has been around a long time. But it's just that Rachel Ells was the one that pulled it all together to show what its combined effect was. And the message I want to get across, it is teachers working together to have appropriately high, challenging expectations of what a year's growth for a year's input looks like, fed with the evidence of impact. And that's what sustains it. It isn't just growth mindset. It's not just rah-rah thinking. It's not just, oh, we can make a difference. But it's that combined belief that it's us that causes learning. It's not the students. It's not the students from particular social backgrounds. It's not all the barriers out there. Because when you fundamentally believe you can make the difference, and then you feed it with the evidence you are, that is dramatically powerful.
What are some takeaways?
It takes a lot of self-reflection and feedback into your own style because it's hard to maybe you're wrong or if you do something better or
Yeah.
you're the barrier in the room. And it starts there.
Absolutely.
That's what you're saying?
It's what a teacher does. It is our teacher skill sets that are so important. And as district leaders and building level leaders, we have to build those skills with our teachers. Sometimes I go into a district to observe a co-teaching relationship, and I have a special educator who doesn't feel competent to go in and provide feedback to a general educator. They just don't feel like they have the skill set. Maybe they're on year 1 and the teacher's classroom they're going into is on year 15. It's a little intimidating. How do I know more than her? She's been doing this for 15 years. So we have to be able to build those skills and that confidence around being able to provide that knowledge to somebody else, and recognizing that both teachers come with a different set of expertise and how to share that amongst the group so that we're working together to improve outcomes for students. Any other takeaways within the video? Yeah, Eric.
That learning requires intentional development of relationship and culture of teaching.
Absolutely. Learning develops intentional relationships and culture.
And culture, yeah.
Absolutely. And I think that takes a level of data literacy that sometimes our teachers aren't comfortable with. So going back to knowledge and skills, what are the knowledge and skills we need? We need to know what data sets we're looking at. We need to understand, like he said, what is a year's growth? What does that mean for our students? And then, do I understand what these numbers are telling me? Have my students mastered it? Have they not? And then, if they haven't, what do I do about it? So thinking through that, and when it is successful and the data is showing us growth, what a better way to improve efficacy among your teachers. It's working. What I'm doing is working. Let's continue. All right, so take a couple seconds at your table and just talk about how you can have this impact, what you're already doing to provide that professional learning, those knowledge and skills to your teachers, maybe what people still need. How can you improve this within your district? I think we hit on most of these, but really pulling from the video, foundational beliefs are important, definitely a shared responsibility and high expectations for all. Knowledge to support diverse student groups. You will notice in the video, and this is something that in this group nobody had stated following the video, but he said not only it's what teachers do, but it's not the students that we're getting. It's not the students that have barriers placed in front of them. It is how we respond to that and what we do with that. So I think that's important to note as well. We need skills to implement whatever supports are in place, and then as talked about, the data. Take a second to read this quote. The practice of their teachers. Again, investing our time and efforts into what our teachers are doing. So this is a quote from 2019, the Council for Exceptional Children. And the Council for Exceptional Children paired together with the Cedar Center to come up with high leverage practices for students with disabilities. How many of you are familiar with the high leverage practices that have come out? Okay, a couple, wonderful. So these are the practices that answer these two questions. What constitutes an effective special educator, and what instructional practices are needed to improve outcomes? So, years of research shows that students with disabilities are underperforming. We know that. We talked about that at the very beginning. CC and the Cedar Center came together with a committee and said, we have got to do something about this. What can we do? We need to improve what our teachers are doing. And that's where they came up with high leverage practices. So I'm going to go over these quickly today and give you some resources that you can dive in around the high leverage practices. There are 22 of them across 4 domains. So the first domain is collaboration. The second domain is assessment. The third is social, emotional, behavioral. And the last one is instruction. So 22 practices fit within these 4 categories. Instruction, of course, is the largest category. But if we can help our teachers, both general education teachers and special education teachers, understand that these are the practices that are effective for our students to improve over time, and give them the knowledge and skills of what these are. Now the thing is, when I go through these, you're going to think, well, teachers know that. But they need to be used consistently and frequently in the classroom in order to improve outcomes. The other thing that I think is so important is when we talk about high leverage practices, because it's the Council for Exceptional Children, it is worded very much for improving outcomes for students with disabilities. But what we know, going back to our circles, where we're all these individuals, we all have our strengths, we all have our areas of need. What is good for students with disabilities is good for all students. So sometimes we are asked to come into a district and do a training with all special educators. I would much prefer going into a training with general educators and special educators mixed together. We need to build this sense of shared responsibility. And we need to say, everybody needs these skills because these are all of our students. I think someone at the back table mentioned as I was walking around earlier that do general education teachers even know how to support students in the general education environment, students with disabilities in the general education environment? And it depends, right? We have teachers who are awesome and amazing and doing it well. And we have other teachers who immediately when they see an academic struggle or behavior, nope, can't do it. They are so far below grade level, I can't possibly be able to provide instruction to this student and the 20 others I have in the classroom. Or I have a student who's running around, how am I supposed to manage his behaviors when all of this is going on as well? And I know you have those teachers. So we have to build the knowledge and the skills of these teachers because that is what is going to improve our outcomes over time. So the first 3 high leverage practices are on collaboration. And the first one is about really collaborating to improve student success. So all that I just said about gen ed teachers and special ed teachers working together, that needs to take place. We also have to collaborate with others within the building. Think about a special ed teacher and how many individuals might be a part of that complex student's needs. Some of our students might have upwards of 8 people, if not more, on that case conference committee. We have OTs, we have PTs, we have school psychs. That's a pretty diverse group of people to collaborate with. And for some people, that skill comes very natural. For other people, that skill is something that needs to be learned. Just like Tyson in kindergarten, he was struggling with the routines of the classroom, but he needed to be taught. Our teachers are no different. If they're not displaying the skill, we have to teach it to them. Collaboration may be something that needs to be taught, whether it's in the form of a case conference committee, whether it's the form of just going into a general education classroom and supporting that teacher. What does that look like? But we have to be able to collaborate with other professionals to increase student success. We have to be able to have effective meetings. Do we have norms? Do we have an agenda? Whether that's a formal meeting like a case conference, or whether that's an informal meeting where I'm meeting with the gen ed teacher to give her the information she needs about that student. Use people's time wisely. We have to teach our teachers how to utilize that time wisely. Coming in, if Andrea has a problem with a student, and I come in and all she's doing is telling me everything that's wrong with Tyson, we've spent 15 minutes talking about all the things that are wrong with Tyson. I need to restory that from the second I walk in with Andrea and start talking about strategies. That's what's going to be effective. So whether it's a formal meeting, informal meeting, we need it to be effective. We don't have enough time to sit and talk about all the bad things about Tyson for a half an hour. And that's not going to help us do any good either. We need to collaborate with our families as well. And I think what's so important, specifically for special educators when we're talking about collaborating with families, is connecting them to resources outside of the school that they may need to support their child. It's not our job to know everything about those resources, but it is part of our job to point them in the right direction for those things. So some districts have a list of resources, general education or special education, for those students that we could provide them to, whether it's a counseling service, whether it's vocational rehabilitation, just a list of those things. Waivers for some of our students. You don't have to know the ins and outs of waivers, but you have to know they're available and point people in that direction for their students. So knowing how to provide those collaborative services across the board for our students. So those are the first 3 high leverage practices. Again, not rocket science, but something you may need to consider are these things that our teachers need support in. Okay, so what is currently being done in your district to engage stakeholders? Whether it's gen ed teachers, whether it's special ed teachers, whether it's at the district level, how are you collaborating? Take some time to talk with your team. All right, let's move to assessment. We touched on this a little bit earlier, assessment, and the importance of really data literacy and having an understanding of what that data is telling us and what it means, but also making sure that we have enough data sets to really comprehensively understand the student. Proficiency rate, 8.9%. If you're only looking at a student's iLearn assessment to determine their areas of strength and opportunities for growth, that's not enough data to tell where a student is. You need to make sure that you have data around academics, of course, but behavioral data as well, and really seeing where students are at. So this really is specific to present levels of performance within the IEP. But you might also look at multiple data sets for other students within Tier 1. And I think that's important too, to convey to our teachers. We're looking at all these data sets. And sometimes we are over-consumed with all of the assessments and data that we are giving to our students and that teachers are looking at. But that's the importance of making sure they understand what's the data that's going to impact this decision, and do I understand what it means? So once I understand what it means, I have to be able to convey that knowledge to others. How many of you have looked at an IEP and seen NWA score of 234? Right? What does that mean? Okay, some of you might be like, well, let me get out my chart. I can tell you exactly what that means. As you should. You're the educator in the room. But when I'm sitting in a case conference and that parent opens that present levels of performance up and sees a 234, do you think they know what that means? And I would argue sometimes even our teachers don't know what that means. They're in this percentile. Okay, what does this percentile score even mean? Sometimes we have to teach that. But more importantly than being able to identify the level that a 234 is, some of those assessments, like NWA, provide that breakdown. Here are the skills associated with that score. That's the type of information that we want to be able to convey to parents, that we want to be able to write within the present levels of performance, not just the number. So again, we have to be giving the assessment, we have to use multiple data sources, but we definitely have to understand the data that's coming in and have access to those scores. Sometimes gen ed teachers have access to all the scores, and as a special ed teacher, I have to go ask permission from the gen ed teacher to get the score. Can special ed teachers have access too? So you can skip a step and be a little bit more efficient? Let's make that happen within our districts. And then we use that data, not just to tell a parent, here's what the score is, here's what it means, but to inform our instruction. How are we having those data meetings to either say it's working or not, and if it's not, what are we doing? If it's working, let's do more of it. If it's not, let's change it up. Many of you might have teachers in PLCs that are having data meetings and having those conversations to change instruction. Are special ed teachers a part of that PLC? Because they absolutely should be, making sure that they're a part of those conversations as well. So that's the assessment component. All right, let's go into social, emotional, behavioral practices. One of our foundational beliefs, academics and social competencies is what we are teaching. So first we have to make sure that we have a consistent, organized, and respectful learning environment. Sounds easy enough, right? We have to make sure that we have this climate and culture, and we're creating this sense of belonging within our classrooms for all students. But if there's that great divide of special ed and gen ed, then my guess is it doesn't feel very respectful for all students within that classroom. If I'm Tyson and I'm always getting in trouble, even in kindergarten, Tyson gets labeled as the bad kid. Then I don't have this sense of belonging as a student within this kindergarten class. I'm the outcast. Not only do I know it, my teacher knows it, and so do all the other students in the classroom. That's not going to help Tyson to be successful. So elementary teachers, amazing at making sure that routines are in place in classroom, making sure we're teaching expectations. I find that the higher grades you go up, it's expected that we know what to do, and we forget to teach at maybe the middle school and high school level. So making sure that we're teaching those routines so that we know what to expect within the classroom. How many of you woke up this morning and opened up your calendar to see what you had on your day, and just so happened to be this all day long, which probably isn't your typical day, right? But you look at it, you know what's going to happen next. You know how much time within that day you have to breathe where you're not running from meeting to meeting. You know what is happening in your day. If I don't have that consistency within my classroom, that creates a lot of anxiety, not just for students with disabilities, but for all students. If I were to take all of your phones and say you can't look at your schedule for the rest of the week, I bet you all would be like, what? Like, I need that, right? So do our students. And just so, because they don't have as much control over their schedule, doesn't mean they can't know what's going to take place. So we need to make sure that we're providing that to our students. Provide positive and constructive feedback for our students. This one is so important. I think it's like 0.74 when we're talking about Hattie and zone of desired effect. So feedback is so important that in high leverage practices, they not only put it here, but they also put it within the instructional component as well. And what is so important about feedback is that it needs to be meaningful and timely. So if I come over here and I say, good job, that's a positive. I wasn't correcting anything, but I also didn't give her any insight on what she was doing well. So within not even a couple seconds more, I can say, good job, I really like the way you're attending, or something like that. And that is so much more powerful than just saying good job. So helping our teachers understand the impact of feedback and timely and meaningful feedback. I thought it was so funny. I went to a training one time and this teacher had a bag that said, "Does this bag make my papers look graded?" And I'm like, that is so true, because how many times do the papers get put in the bag and a week later we're returning them to our students? And I know teachers are busy. I'm not trying to discount all the things they have on their list. But when I give that test back a week later, it's much less impactful than if I'm giving it within the next day or the next 2 days and having conversations about what we did well and what we can improve upon for next time. So timely and meaningful for feedback. We have to teach our social behaviors, which we've been talking about. And for some of our students, we have to be able to do a functional behavior assessment, collect data, and do a behavior intervention plan. Sometimes this last one, it becomes the sole job of the special ed teacher to do these things. They're not just in the special ed teacher's class. I need to have an understanding of what behavior looks like across the building. So when I'm doing an FBA and I'm collecting data, I need input from everyone on the team. Better yet, if I can sit down and have a meeting and a conversation about it. But if not, at least some type of written information to be able to go off of. And a behavior intervention plan has to be implemented. So if it has to be implemented in Melissa's class, I need to make sure that Melissa can sustain that within her classroom over time. Because you can have a beautifully written plan, but if it's not implemented, then there's really no purpose to it. So again, that shared responsibility, we have to work together on this. All right, let's do a quick brain break. You have fidgets on your table. You need to be paired up, and you need a fidget between the two of you. If you have 3, you can probably do this as a 3. To prevent the glassed over look, we're going to do this really quickly. I'm going to give you a directive. You're going to follow that directive. And when I say fidget, you and your partner are going to see who can get to the fidget first. No cheating. All right. Put your hands on your head. Hands on your shoulders. Hands on your elbow. Hands on your hip. Fidget. Okay. Next. Hand on your nose. Hand on your eye. Hand on your head. Fidget. Oh, I went faster that time. Okay. If you happen to have a tie, this is your tiebreaker. Hand on your ears. Hand on your shoulder. Hand on your elbow. Hand on your head. Fidget. All right. So, that had no content instruction whatsoever. But by the time I get through the first half of high leverage practices, I see a lot of glazed over faces. Just like when we're in content with our students, that happens to them. This took less than 2 minutes to do. You don't have to have fancy fidgets. You can use a pen or pencil. But even if you haven't been engaged all morning, all of you were engaged at that moment, and my hope is to get you all back for the few minutes that I have before lunch. So, brain breaks are important for all levels of learning, and they don't have to take a long time and remove from instruction. But definitely something to include within our classrooms. Okay, so here is the meat. All around instruction, these are the high leverage practices. So the first one, we have long-term and short-term goals for our students. How many of you, whether it's at the elementary, middle, or high school level, have students within the general education environment create goals for themselves and track data on those goals? Love it. Love the data binders at the elementary level. Love students being able to understand what we're working towards and know their growth. I would argue even our high school students, at times, special education student, if I were to say, what is a goal within your IEP? they might look at you with a blank stare. Because it's a document that was written about them, not with them sometimes. And making sure that they know what their goals are. Are they aware? This is what we want you to achieve. Are you getting there? Are you not? Those conversations are important. And if we help students realize where we want them to go, and they have some say in where they're going, they're much more invested within their learning. So we're also systematically designing our instruction to meet our learning goals. We're adapting curriculum and materials. So I heard someone say earlier that, I think it was over here, just as I was eavesdropping, about we have, I think it was a functional skills teacher in a biology class, something like that, and not knowing the content. Again, it's really hard to adapt and modify if we don't have the tools that we need. I'm not asking this teacher to go get a biology degree and be able to teach that. But that is the importance of that shared responsibility between the gen ed teacher and the special ed teacher. Gen ed content expert, that's what you went to school for, that's your passion. As a special ed teacher, I just so happen to get assigned to your biology class. Biology is not my passion, but supporting diverse learners is my passion. So I might need the key for that biology test in order to modify it. But that communication and the district saying this is what needs to happen, this is the role of the gen ed teacher, this is the role of the special ed teacher, and how do those lines start to blur over time when people get more competent and comfortable, needs to happen. So they have to work together. We need to teach our students both cognitive and metacognitive strategies. Think about your students who will spend 20 minutes reading, and then you say, okay, put the book down, and you pose a question, and they have no clue what they just read about. Happens often. Even myself, my brain wanders when I'm reading, and I have to pull myself back in. But I learned that over time. This is how I learn, and this happens sometimes. And we have to be able to teach our students how to recognize that. So are they, I'm sorry, after every paragraph you're taking a Post-it and you're telling me what you wrote. Like just that self-corrective action. When my mind starts to shift, here's what I have to do. Here's a skill that I have to do in order to be more successful. And it's more than just academic, it's behavior too. When I start to feel like my legs need some movement in them, and I know I'm going to get in trouble if I just hop up and start running around the room, how do we teach that it's okay to go stand in the back of the room? It's okay to pace back and forth if that's what you need during that time. And it's okay, not just for you because you have a disability, but it's okay for all kids within our classroom. It's just what we do. So teaching that type of skill. Providing scaffolded supports, again, something we probably expect our teachers to be doing, but if it's not done frequently or consistently, then it's not going to be as effective. Remember, 22 of the high leverage practices we want to see all the time. Explicit instruction. I do, we do, you do. Anita Archer, right? Everybody's like, yep, got it. How often are you seeing it in classrooms? And I'm not saying take 20 minutes and provide explicit instruction. Take your 5 to 10 minutes, provide it, and then have them do something with the information that you just provided. Flexible grouping. I think this one is definitely something to consider when we're talking about the great divide between special ed and general ed. If you have the kidney table in the back that the students are always going back to, and it's the same group of students every single time, that is not inclusion. They're still segregated within that classroom. Think about the circles at the beginning. The circle inside all the green circles. Yes, they're in the classroom, but they're not getting access to the same education, and they're always pulled with the same students over and over. Students with disabilities have strengths and needs. General education students have strengths and needs. It's not always going to be the same students pulled back to the table. You can do different things with flexible grouping. It can be random. It could be based on skill, but it doesn't have to be. We were in a training with Christina Dubé talking all about differentiation. Of course, flexible grouping is a big part of that, but she said that one of the teachers that she worked with had open invitation sessions. So any student could come work with the teacher during open invitation, and she also had invited sessions. that she would do based on skill. So she varied that up throughout the week, and it just became a routine. If it's open, anybody can come. If it's by invitation only, then those who were asked to come are going to come back to the table. But if there's a stigma around the grouping in your classroom and someone feels bad about having to go work with the teacher, you're probably not utilizing enough flexible grouping. Or if Miss So-and-so students are always back at the kiddie table, you're probably not using enough flexible grouping. Promoting active student engagement. I was trying to think of his name. What's Todd's last name, Angie? Todd Whitney and Terry Scott both wrote a wonderful book of, I think it's 14 instructional strategies for active student engagement. It's a quick, easy, super simple read, but great things to teach your teachers to provide that knowledge and skills around what's effective. Like some of it's as easy as the fist to 5, but some of those easy, quick checks that you could utilize. Use assistive and instructional technologies. If any of you are not familiar with PATINS, you probably should be. But they are the Assistive Technology Resource Center across the state and can provide you not only with the tools but the skills in order to utilize these things. But let's also not forget about the technology that we have in our pockets every day and our iPads and devices. If you have a one-to-one district, all of those have a lot of accessibility features that can be used, and not just for students with disabilities. Let's normalize it's okay to listen to a book while reading. Time spent reading is the greatest predictor of reading. Let's make sure that we have students who are utilizing those and not just our students with disabilities. How do we promote this for all? If they all have it, why not use it? Where am I at? Teach students to maintain and generalize across settings. Again, the importance of being included within the general education setting. If I can only do it in this pull-out setting and I can't generalize to the gen ed setting, it's a lot of good teaching, but I've got to be able to do it across settings, so we have to teach that. So if they are taught separately, how are we doing that over time? And again, like I said, the repeat of feedback. There is some good information and data on feedback. I did pull a slide from a training that we did the other day from Todd Whitney, but it really talks about the importance of feedback and how minimal feedback takes place even at the elementary level. So think about your positive feedback to your negative feedback, and just having teachers understand how much feedback in the classroom is actually more corrective than providing that positive feedback. And if you were to have teachers kind of take themselves for about 5 to 10 minutes and how much they corrected versus how much they provided positive feedback, the numbers are astronomical. Even if you think you have a very positive teacher overall, there's a lot more corrective feedback than you would ever realize. And I'll actually add that slide to the Padlet because I think I don't have the numbers memorized, but I think the data is super interesting to fill in, and just having teachers recognize the importance of positive feedback over that corrective feedback. All right, so there is a self-assessment tool through CEDAR. So for your teachers, I think when you look at this list, and even though I just went through all 22, you're probably thinking this is something that I feel as if teachers already know or should know. And I think there are some on here, absolutely. So you can give your teachers this self-assessment tool, and a self-assessment is good, as a self-assessment is, but have them rate where they think they are in each of these practices. What are they doing frequently? What are they maybe have no knowledge base on whatsoever? Or what do they need additional training on? It's kind of hard to find on highleveragepractices.org, so I did link it within the Padlet. If this is something that's of interest to you, then you can go ahead and pull that up and utilize it with some of your teachers to maybe target some of your PD based on their self-identified needs. The other thing that I think are kind of tricky to find are these trifolds. So these are, again, from the CEDAR Center and CEC, but they're high leverage practice trifolds. I know that when we hand teachers books, they think I can't possibly read a whole nother book, or I don't have time to do this. So these are trifolds. They explain the high leverage practice domain on the front page, and then they offer tons of strategies throughout the rest of the document on these high leverage practices. Again, they have 2 books on high leverage practices. One is utilizing them in general. The other is utilizing them specifically in more inclusive environments. But I would say forego the books, and the trifolds are better. So those are linked for you as well under that high leverage practice domain. I don't have enough time to finish out the morning, so I'm going to take a little bit of your afternoon. That's okay, Angie. But I do want to end with this slide this morning. Not only is collective teacher efficacy important, if you remember back from the Menti, the third question I ask is promoting self-efficacy among students. So again, the effect size is 1.44. So not only is it important for our teachers to have a belief, a knowledge and skill set to do the work and to provide supports for diverse learners, it's also important for our learners to have belief that they can be successful. So think about when we're combining, if we have teachers, both special ed and gen ed, saying, look, I can do this. We have students who say, hey, I can do this. It might be hard, but I'm going to get there. I can do this. How can that improve outcomes alone? 1.57, 1.44. Off the charts when we're talking about zone of desired effect. So this is where we need to spend our time and efforts. This is part of improving outcomes. All right, it is 11:08. Let's come back at 12:15. Because you have an extra 7 minutes, please try to be back on time. I know when you're going out and you're eating, it's hard to get back in an hour, but skedaddle now, you'll beat the lunch crowd, and then we'll come back at 12:15 to finish out this section.